I've decided to leave you for someone who actually understands my ambitions." The words echoed through our elegant dining room as my husband of 16 years delivered his announcement over what I had believed would be a romantic anniversary dinner. When I calmly reached into my briefcase and placed a thick manila envelope on the table between our untouched plates, his confident smirk vanished completely. What happened next would transform not only our marriage but my entire understanding of my own strength and capability. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Victoria Sterling, and I am 43 years old. Until that precise moment on our wedding anniversary, I had been living the carefully constructed life of a successful corporate executive's wife. I had supported my husband Richard through his rise from regional sales manager to chief executive officer of Meridian Financial Solutions, a prestigious investment firm that managed portfolios worth over $2 billion. Throughout his career advancement, I had maintained my own demanding position as Senior Director of Operations at Hartwell Industries, a manufacturing company where I had built a reputation for efficiency, strategic thinking, and unwavering professionalism. The irony of Richard's announcement was not lost on me. He was leaving me for someone who understood his ambitions, when I had been the architect behind many of the strategic decisions that had elevated his career. During the early years of our marriage, I had provided the financial stability that allowed him to pursue advanced business education. I had networked extensively within professional circles to create opportunities for his advancement. I had even ghostwritten several industry articles that had been published under his name, establishing his reputation as a thought leader in financial services. Our anniversary dinner had been planned weeks in advance, with reservations at Chez Laurent, the exclusive French restaurant where Richard had proposed 16 years earlier. I had arrived directly from an important board meeting, still wearing my tailored navy suit and carrying the leather briefcase that had become my professional signature. Richard was already seated at our usual corner table, but his demeanor was different from what I had expected for our anniversary celebration. Instead of the warm smile that had once greeted me, his expression was cold and calculated, suggesting that this evening would unfold very differently from my expectations. The setting was elegant and intimate, with soft lighting and fresh flowers creating an atmosphere that should have been romantic and celebratory. The sommelier had already presented our traditional anniversary wine, a vintage Bordeaux that we had shared every year since our engagement. The familiar ritual of anniversary traditions made Richard's announcement even more shocking and devastating, transforming what should have been a celebration of our partnership into a public humiliation orchestrated with cruel precision. "Victoria, we need to discuss the future of our marriage," Richard had begun with the measured tone he typically reserved for difficult business negotiations. "I've been doing considerable reflection about our relationship, and I've reached some important conclusions about what I need for personal and professional fulfillment." His language was formal and detached, as though he were presenting a corporate restructuring plan rather than ending our marriage. The clinical approach to such an intimate conversation revealed a side of Richard that I had occasionally glimpsed during his business dealings, but had never experienced directed toward me personally. "I've realized that our marriage has become more of a business partnership than a romantic relationship," he continued, completely ignoring the contribution that our business partnership had made to his professional success. "We've grown in different directions, and I need someone who shares my vision for the future and understands the demands of executive leadership." The supreme irony of his statement was almost breathtaking. I had been providing exactly that understanding and support throughout our entire marriage, often at considerable personal cost. During the years when Richard was establishing his career, I had accepted social obligations that bored me, attended corporate events that I found tedious, and maintained friendships with spouses of his business associates primarily to support his professional advancement. "I've been seeing someone who better understands my professional world and personal aspirations," Richard announced with the confidence of someone who believed he held all the advantages in this conversation. "Her name is Cassandra Mitchell, and she's been working as my executive assistant for the past 18 months. We've developed a connection that goes far beyond professional collaboration." Cassandra Mitchell. The name was familiar from countless business calls and corporate events. She was 29 years old, ambitious, and undeniably attractive in the polished way that successful professional women often cultivate. I had met her several times at company functions and had actually been impressed by her competence and professionalism. She had seemed intelligent and capable, qualities that I respected in professional settings. The revelation that she had been involved with my husband created a complex mixture of emotions that was difficult to process immediately. Betrayal was certainly prominent, but it was accompanied by a strange sense of professional disappointment that someone I had respected had participated in such deception. The personal and professional dimensions of the betrayal were intertwined in ways that made the situation particularly painful and complicated. Cassandra and I have been planning our future together, Richard continued with obvious satisfaction. We've been looking at property in the Hamptons, and she's been helping me develop strategic plans for expanding Meridian's international operations. She brings a fresh perspective and genuine enthusiasm for my professional vision. His description of their relationship emphasized professional collaboration and shared ambitions, apparently oblivious to the fact that I had been providing exactly those contributions throughout our marriage. The difference, presumably, was that Cassandra offered these contributions in a younger, more attractive package that enhanced his ego rather than simply supporting his practical needs. I want you to know that this decision wasn't made lightly, Richard said with false sincerity. I have tremendous respect for you and everything you've contributed to my success. However, I believe we'll both be happier pursuing separate futures with people who better complement our individual goals and aspirations. His attempt to frame the conversation in terms of mutual benefit was particularly insulting, suggesting that I should somehow be grateful for his honesty in abandoning our marriage for someone who excited him more than I did. The assumption that I would accept this explanation gracefully revealed how completely he had underestimated both my intelligence and my preparation for exactly this possibility. The manila envelope that I placed on the table contained the results of 6 months of careful investigation and documentation. Unlike Richard, I had not been planning an affair or plotting the dissolution of our marriage. However, I had been observing subtle changes in his behavior, unexplained expenses on our joint accounts, and increasingly frequent business trips that seemed unnecessary given his established client relationships. My professional background in operations management had trained me to recognize patterns and investigate discrepancies that others might overlook. When I noticed irregularities in Richard's schedule and spending patterns, I had applied the same analytical approach that I used for corporate problem-solving to understand what was happening in my personal life. The investigation had revealed far more than just an extramarital affair. Richard had been using company resources to finance his relationship with Cassandra, including expensive dinners, weekend trips, and jewelry purchases that violated both corporate policy and fiduciary responsibility to company shareholders. More significantly, he had been sharing confidential client information with Cassandra that she had no authorization to access, creating potential legal liability for both Richard and Meridian Financial Solutions. "What's in the envelope, Victoria?" Richard asked with obvious nervousness as he stared at the thick document packet that I had placed between us. His confident demeanor was beginning to crack as he realized that I had come to this conversation with preparation that he had not anticipated. "Documentation," I replied calmly, maintaining the composed professionalism that had served me well throughout my corporate career. "Evidence of various activities that I believe you and Cassandra will find quite interesting." I opened the envelope and removed a bound report that contained photocopies of credit card statements, hotel receipts, restaurant charges, and jewelry purchase records that detailed the financial aspects of Richard's affair. Each expense was highlighted and annotated, creating a comprehensive picture of how company funds had been diverted to support his personal relationship. These documents show systematic misuse of corporate expense accounts over the past 18 months, I explained in the same measured tone that I used for presenting operational analyses to company executives. The total amount involved exceeds $47,000, which constitutes embezzlement under state and federal law. Richard's face went pale as he recognized the implications of the documentation. As Chief Executive Officer, he was bound by strict fiduciary responsibilities that prohibited personal use of company resources. The evidence I had compiled could result not only in his termination, but also in criminal prosecution for financial fraud. "You've been busy," he said with forced casualness, though his hands were visibly trembling as he flipped through the financial documentation. "This seems like an excessive response to normal business entertainment expenses." "These are not business entertainment expenses," I corrected firmly. "These are personal expenses related to your extramarital affair, charged to corporate accounts without proper authorization or legitimate business justification. Each transaction violates multiple company policies and legal requirements." The second section of my documentation contained even more damaging evidence of Richard's professional misconduct. I had discovered that he had been providing Cassandra with access to confidential client portfolios and strategic planning documents that she had no authorization to review. This violation of client confidentiality could result in regulatory sanctions against both Richard and Meridian Financial Solutions. The Securities and Exchange Commission takes client confidentiality violations extremely seriously, I continued, maintaining my calm professional demeanor despite the satisfaction I felt at watching Richard's confidence disintegrate. The documentation shows that Cassandra has had access to confidential information about at least 12 major client accounts, creating substantial regulatory liability for the company. Richard's attempt to maintain composure was failing rapidly as he realized the extent of my preparation and the seriousness of the legal implications. This was not the tearful, emotional response that he had apparently expected from his anniversary announcement. Instead, he was facing a comprehensive legal and professional disaster that I had methodically documented over 6 months of careful investigation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "What do you want?" he asked quietly, finally recognizing that I held substantial advantages in whatever negotiation would follow his failed attempt to humiliate and abandon me. "I want you to understand that your actions have consequences," I replied with satisfaction that I had finally found my voice after years of supporting his ambitions while suppressing my own. "You assumed that I would accept your betrayal gracefully and fade quietly into the background while you enjoyed your new life with Cassandra. You were incorrect." The envelope contained additional documentation that would prove even more devastating to Richard's carefully constructed plans. I had discovered that he had been planning to transfer substantial marital assets to accounts that Cassandra could access, effectively stealing community property to fund their new life together. This evidence would ensure that any divorce settlement would be heavily weighted in my favor. More importantly, I had been developing my own strategic plan for life after marriage. Unlike Richard, who had been focused entirely on his immediate gratification, I had been preparing for a future that would allow me to pursue professional opportunities that I had deferred during years of supporting his career advancement. The woman who had entered the restaurant that evening as a supportive corporate spouse would leave as someone who had discovered her own strength, strategic capability, and unwillingness to accept betrayal without consequences. Richard's anniversary announcement had inadvertently forced me to recognize abilities and resources that I had been underutilizing throughout our marriage. His confident assumption that I would accept his betrayal gracefully had revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of both my character and my capabilities. The manila envelope represented not just evidence of his misconduct, but also my transformation from passive victim to strategic advocate for my own interests and dignity. As I watched Richard struggle to comprehend the full implications of my documentation, I realized that this conversation marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life, where I would no longer subordinate my own ambitions to support someone who took my contributions for granted while pursuing his own selfish interests. The silence that followed my presentation of the evidence stretched across our anniversary table like a chasm that could never be bridged. Richard stared at the documentation with the expression of someone watching his carefully constructed world collapse in real time. The confident executive who had entered the restaurant expecting to orchestrate my humiliation was rapidly transforming into a man confronting the devastating consequences of his own arrogance and misconduct. I observed his reaction with the detached analytical approach that had served me well throughout my career in operations management. Every micro-expression, every nervous gesture, every attempt to regain composure provided valuable information about his mental state and strategic options. This was no longer a personal conversation between spouses. It had become a negotiation between adversaries, where preparation and intelligence would determine the outcome. The foundation of our marriage had been cracking for months, though I had been the only one paying attention to the structural damage. While Richard had been consumed with his affair and personal gratification, I had been conducting a comprehensive analysis of our relationship, our finances, and our future prospects. The investigation that had revealed his misconduct was actually part of a broader assessment of whether our marriage could be salvaged or whether dissolution was inevitable. My professional background had taught me to recognize systemic problems before they became catastrophic failures. The skills I had developed managing complex manufacturing operations translated directly to analyzing relationship dynamics and identifying patterns that indicated fundamental instability. Richard's behavioral changes over the past year had created a clear trajectory toward this moment of confrontation. The early signs had been subtle but consistent with patterns I had observed in corporate environments, when executives began prioritizing personal interests over institutional responsibilities. Richard had started working longer hours without corresponding increases in productivity or results. His travel schedule had become irregular and poorly documented, with vague explanations about client meetings that could not be verified through normal business channels. More significantly, his attitude toward me had shifted from partnership to dismissive tolerance. Conversations that had once involved mutual consultation about decisions affecting our household had become one-sided announcements of his plans and expectations. He had begun treating me like a subordinate rather than an equal partner, reflecting the power dynamics that apparently characterized his relationship with Cassandra. The financial irregularities had been the most concrete evidence of systematic deception. My background in operations management included extensive experience with financial analysis and fraud detection, skills that proved invaluable when applied to personal circumstances. The pattern of unauthorized expenses and unexplained charges had created a clear trail of evidence that documented not only the affair, but also the financial misconduct that made Richard vulnerable to both civil and criminal liability. However, my investigation had revealed problems that extended far beyond Richard's personal misconduct. The financial analysis had exposed fundamental weaknesses in our joint financial planning that made me uncomfortably dependent on his income and professional stability. Despite my own successful career, I had allowed our financial structure to evolve in ways that gave Richard disproportionate control over our long-term security. This recognition had prompted me to conduct a comprehensive audit of our entire financial situation, including assets, liabilities, income sources, and legal obligations. The results had been sobering, revealing that Richard's potential professional disgrace could have devastating consequences for my own financial stability if I remained passive and unprepared for the eventual dissolution of our marriage. The documentation in the manila envelope represented more than evidence of Richard's affair and misconduct. It represented my transformation from dependent spouse to strategic advocate for my own interests and future security. Every document had been carefully selected and organized to maximize my negotiating position, while demonstrating the serious legal and professional consequences that Richard would face if he continued his current course of action. "You've been planning this for months," Richard said finally, his voice lacking the confidence that had characterized his anniversary announcement. The realization that I had been several steps ahead of his own planning had obviously shaken his assumptions about both my awareness and my capabilities. "I've been preparing for various contingencies," I replied with deliberate precision. "Your behavior over the past year created obvious risks that required careful analysis and strategic planning. I approached the situation with the same professional methodology that I use for operational challenges at Hartwell Industries." My response was designed to emphasize that his misconduct had been discovered through systematic investigation rather than emotional suspicion or accidental discovery. The professional tone reinforced that I was treating this situation as a business problem requiring strategic solutions, rather than a personal betrayal requiring emotional responses. The comparison to my corporate work was particularly relevant because Richard had often expressed skepticism about the importance and complexity of operations management, suggesting that my professional achievements were less significant than his executive responsibilities. His dismissive attitude toward my career had been another indicator of the fundamental lack of respect that had made his affair psychologically easier to justify. "What exactly do you expect to accomplish with this documentation?" Richard asked, attempting to regain some measure of control over the conversation. "You're threatening my career and professional reputation over a personal matter that could be resolved through normal divorce proceedings. His characterization of systematic embezzlement and confidentiality violations as a personal matter revealed the extent to which he had rationalized his misconduct. The apparent inability to recognize the serious legal and ethical dimensions of his actions suggested either profound self-deception or complete disregard for professional standards and legal requirements. The documentation establishes a factual record of activities that violate both corporate policy and legal requirements, I explained with the patience typically reserved for explaining obvious concepts to particularly dense colleagues. The Securities and Exchange Commission, the Internal Revenue Service, and Meridian's Board of Directors would all have legitimate interests in reviewing this information. Richard's face went completely pale as he began to comprehend the full scope of the regulatory and legal exposure that his actions had created. The confident executive who had assumed that his affair was a private matter was confronting the reality that his misconduct had created substantial professional and legal liability that could destroy his career and financial security. The regulatory implications were particularly serious because Richard's position as chief executive officer created fiduciary responsibilities that extended far beyond normal employee obligations. The misuse of corporate resources and confidentiality violations could trigger investigations that would expose Meridian Financial Solutions to regulatory sanctions and civil liability that would inevitably result in his termination and potential criminal prosecution. You're talking about destroying my entire career over a relationship that has nothing to do with my professional competence, Richard said desperately, finally recognizing that his personal choices had created professional consequences that could not be easily contained or dismissed. Your professional competence is precisely what is in question, I responded firmly. An executive who steals corporate resources to finance personal relationships and shares confidential client information with unauthorized individuals has demonstrated fundamental failures of judgment, ethics, and legal compliance. The conversation was revealing aspects of Richard's character that I had either overlooked or rationalized during our marriage. His apparent inability to recognize the ethical dimensions of his actions suggested a moral framework that prioritized personal gratification over professional responsibilities and legal obligations. More troubling was his assumption that I would accept his betrayal without resistance or consequences. This expectation revealed a profound misunderstanding of both my character and my capabilities, suggesting that he had never truly understood the person he had married or the professional skills that I brought to our relationship. The evening had begun with Richard's confident assumption that he controlled the terms of our marital dissolution. His plan had apparently involved humiliating me publicly while positioning himself as someone pursuing legitimate personal fulfillment, rather than someone abandoning his responsibilities through selfish misconduct. However, the evidence I had compiled had completely reversed the power dynamics of our relationship. Instead of begging him to reconsider or accepting his departure gracefully, I was presenting him with documentation that could destroy his career and financial security, while providing me with substantial advantages in any legal proceedings that would follow. The transformation was both professional and personal. For years, I had been supporting Richard's ambitions while minimizing my own professional achievements and strategic capabilities. The investigation that had revealed his misconduct had also revealed my own analytical skills and strategic thinking abilities that I had been underutilizing throughout our marriage. "What do you want from me?" Richard asked quietly, finally recognizing that his anniversary announcement had initiated a negotiation where I held most of the effective leverage. "I want you to understand that your actions have consequences that extend far beyond your personal satisfaction." I replied with satisfaction that I had finally found my voice after years of supporting his interests while suppressing my own priorities and preferences. The question also represented an opportunity to establish the terms for whatever relationship would follow this conversation. Whether we attempted reconciliation or proceeded with divorce, Richard needed to understand that I would no longer accept a subordinate role in decisions affecting my interests and future security. The foundation of our marriage had been built on assumptions about roles, responsibilities, and power dynamics that no longer reflected either my capabilities or my willingness to accept arrangements that prioritized his interests over mine. His affair had inadvertently forced a renegotiation of our entire relationship structure. More importantly, the crisis had catalyzed my recognition of professional and personal strengths that I had been neglecting throughout our marriage. The strategic planning and analytical capabilities that I had developed through my corporate career were directly applicable to personal challenges and opportunities, that I had previously approached with excessive deference to Richard's preferences and decisions. The woman who had entered the restaurant that evening as a supportive corporate spouse was discovering her own capacity for strategic thinking, thorough preparation, and effective advocacy for her own interests. Richard's betrayal had inadvertently created an opportunity for personal transformation that would ultimately prove more valuable than maintaining a marriage based on unequal partnership and mutual deception. As I watched Richard struggle to process the implications of my documentation, I realized that this conversation represented the beginning of a new chapter in my life, where I would prioritize my own judgment and interests, rather than automatically deferring to his preferences and expectations. The foundation of our marriage had indeed cracked, but the structural damage had revealed opportunities for rebuilding on terms that reflected my actual worth and capabilities, rather than the diminished role that I had accepted during years of supporting his ambitions, while neglecting my own potential for leadership and strategic achievement. The drive home from Chez Laurent occurred in complete silence, with Richard following behind me in his BMW while I navigated the familiar streets in my Mercedes. The elegant neighborhood that had represented our shared success now felt like a stage set for a performance that had concluded with devastating finality. Every landmark along our route carried memories of a marriage that had apparently been deteriorating while I remained focused on maintaining the illusion of partnership and mutual respect. Our Tudor-style home in Westchester's most prestigious subdivision had been purchased 8 years earlier as a symbol of Richard's ascending career trajectory and our commitment to building a life together that reflected our professional achievements. The mortgage payments consumed a substantial portion of our monthly income, but Richard had insisted that executive presence required a residence that conveyed appropriate status and financial success to his colleagues and clients. As I pulled into our circular driveway, I confronted the practical reality that this elegant home represented far more than shelter or investment. It symbolized financial obligations, social expectations, and lifestyle commitments that would become significantly more complex to maintain as a divorced woman pursuing independent financial security rather than as part of a dual-income executive household. The interior of our home reflected the careful attention to detail and sophisticated taste that Richard had insisted upon for entertaining corporate clients and maintaining his professional image. Every piece of furniture, every artwork selection, and every decorative element had been chosen to project success, refinement, and executive competence to visitors who might influence his career advancement or business relationships. However, the elegant surroundings now felt like an expensive prison rather than a comfortable sanctuary. The monthly carrying costs for maintaining this lifestyle included not only mortgage payments, but also property taxes, insurance premiums, maintenance expenses, and utility costs that totaled nearly $8,000 monthly. These fixed obligations would continue regardless of changes in our marital status or household income structure. I settled into my home office, a space that Richard had grudgingly allocated for my corporate work, after I had insisted that conducting business from our bedroom was neither professional nor practical. The room contained my computer systems, filing cabinets, and reference materials that supported my responsibilities at Hartwell Industries, but it had never been designed or equipped as a comprehensive workspace for managing complex personal and legal challenges. The documentation that I had presented to Richard represented months of careful investigation and analysis, but it was only the beginning of the strategic planning that would be required to navigate the dissolution of our marriage, while protecting my financial security and professional reputation. The practical challenges ahead would require resources, expertise, and strategic thinking that extended far beyond the analytical skills that had served me well in corporate operations management. My immediate priority involved conducting a comprehensive assessment of our financial situation from the perspective of potential divorce proceedings rather than ongoing marital partnership. This analysis would require detailed evaluation of assets, liabilities, income sources, and legal obligations that could be affected by Richard's professional misconduct and the regulatory investigations that my documentation might trigger. The joint checking account showed a current balance of $43,000, while our savings accounts contained an additional $67,000 in liquid assets that could be accessed for immediate expenses. However, these funds were legally considered marital property that would be subject to division through divorce proceedings, meaning that my access to these resources was temporary and uncertain. Our investment portfolios were substantially more complex, including Richard's executive stock options, retirement accounts, real estate holdings, and various financial instruments that had been acquired during our marriage. The total value of these assets exceeded $2 million, but the actual distribution would depend on factors including the length of divorce proceedings, Richard's employment status, and any legal complications arising from his professional misconduct. More concerning was my discovery that Richard had been systematically moving funds from our joint accounts to individual accounts that I could not access or monitor. The pattern of transfers suggested that he had been planning his departure for considerably longer than his anniversary announcement had indicated, and that his financial preparation had been far more extensive than I had initially realized. The bank statements revealed transfers totaling nearly $120,000 over the past 9 months, funds that had been moved to accounts bearing only Richard's name and signature authority. These transfers represented a systematic attempt to hide marital assets in preparation for divorce proceedings, a practice that constituted financial fraud and could result in severe penalties during asset division negotiations. However, my analysis also revealed that Richard's financial planning had been short-sighted and potentially self-destructive. The evidence I had compiled regarding his misuse of corporate resources and confidentiality violations could trigger regulatory investigations that would almost certainly result in his termination from Meridian Financial Solutions, eliminating his primary income source and destroying his professional reputation within the financial services industry. The Securities and Exchange Commission imposed severe penalties for executives who violated fiduciary responsibilities and client confidentiality requirements. Richard's documented misconduct could result not only in termination but also in regulatory sanctions that would prevent him from working in any securities-related position for years or potentially permanently. The Internal Revenue Service would also have substantial interest in the unreported personal benefits that Richard had received through corporate expense account abuse. The tax implications alone could result in penalties and interest charges that would consume much of the assets he had been attempting to hide from our marital estate. These regulatory and legal consequences meant that Richard's earning capacity would be severely compromised, precisely when he would need maximum income to support both his financial obligations to me and his new lifestyle with Cassandra. The confident executive, who had assumed that his affair would lead to personal and professional liberation, was actually facing potential financial ruin that would affect everyone connected to his life and career. My own financial situation was more stable but still vulnerable to the broader consequences of Richard's misconduct. My position at Hartwell Industries provided annual compensation of $140,000 plus performance bonuses, sufficient to support a comfortable lifestyle, but inadequate to maintain our current standard of living without Richard's substantially higher executive income. The mortgage payments on our home alone consumed nearly half of my monthly take-home pay, leaving insufficient resources for the property taxes, insurance, maintenance, and utility costs that were required to maintain this expensive residence. The practical reality was that I would need to either secure significantly higher income or reduce my housing costs substantially to achieve sustainable financial independence. However, my analysis also revealed opportunities that had not been apparent while I remained focused on supporting Richard's career rather than developing my own professional potential. My experience in operations management had provided expertise that was highly valued in the corporate market, and my track record of successful project leadership could support consulting opportunities or executive positions with substantially higher compensation. The crisis that Richard had created through his affair and misconduct was also an opportunity to pursue career advancement that I had deferred during years of prioritizing his professional goals over my own ambitions. The supportive spouse role that I had maintained throughout our marriage had limited my networking activities and professional visibility in ways that had probably constrained my earning potential and advancement opportunities. The investigation that had revealed Richard's misconduct had also demonstrated analytical and strategic planning capabilities that I had been underutilizing in my corporate role. The comprehensive documentation that I had assembled required skills in financial analysis, legal research, investigative methodology, and strategic communication that represented marketable expertise in consulting and executive advisory services. More importantly, the crisis had forced me to recognize personal strengths and capabilities that I had been neglecting throughout our marriage. The woman who had discovered Richard's affair and compiled comprehensive evidence of his misconduct was far more strategically capable and professionally qualified than the supportive spouse who had been minimizing her own achievements to avoid threatening Richard's executive ego. The practical challenges ahead would require financial resources that exceeded my current liquid assets, particularly for legal representation, investigative services, and the substantial costs associated with divorce proceedings involving complex asset division and potential regulatory violations. However, my analysis suggested that the evidence I had compiled would provide significant leverage in negotiations with Richard and substantial advantages in formal legal proceedings. The documentation of financial misconduct and regulatory violations meant that Richard would face powerful incentives to settle divorce terms favorably rather than risk public exposure and professional destruction through extended litigation. The regulatory investigations that my evidence could trigger would create timeline pressures that would work to my advantage in asset division negotiations. Furthermore, the spousal support obligations that Richard would face would be calculated based on his historical income rather than his reduced post-scandal earning capacity, meaning that his financial responsibilities to me would remain substantial, even if his career was destroyed by regulatory sanctions and professional disgrace. The practical weight of these realities was both sobering and empowering. The comfortable life that I had built in partnership with Richard was ending, but the crisis was revealing opportunities for independence and professional advancement that could ultimately prove more rewarding than the subordinate role I had accepted during our marriage. The woman who had entered the restaurant that evening as a dependent spouse was discovering her capacity for strategic analysis, comprehensive planning, and effective advocacy for her own interests. Richard's betrayal had inadvertently catalyzed a transformation that would ultimately lead to greater professional success and personal autonomy than I had achieved during years of supporting his ambitions while suppressing my own potential. The foundation of our marriage had cracked beyond repair, but the structural damage was revealing opportunities to rebuild my life on terms that reflected my actual capabilities and worth, rather than the diminished expectations that I had accepted as the price of marital harmony and social respectability. The morning after our confrontation at Chez Laurent brought an unexpected phone call that would fundamentally alter my understanding of how professional networks operate, and how information travels through corporate circles in ways that are often invisible to those outside established power structures. The caller was Margaret Chen, senior partner at Whitmore & Associates, one of the most prestigious law firms specializing in corporate governance and executive litigation in the tri-state area. Margaret had apparently learned about my situation through professional channels that I had not anticipated, revealing that Richard's misconduct and our marital crisis had already become subjects of discussion among legal and financial professionals who monitored corporate governance issues and regulatory compliance violations. Her call demonstrated that information about executive misconduct travels rapidly through specialized networks that track such developments for both legal and business intelligence purposes. "Victoria, I hope you'll forgive the unexpected contact," Margaret began, with the measured professionalism that characterized attorneys who handled sensitive corporate matters. "I've been following developments related to Meridian Financial Solutions through various professional channels, and I understand that you may need specialized legal counsel regarding matters that intersect corporate governance and family law." Her approach was both discreet and informed, suggesting that she possessed detailed knowledge about Richard's misconduct and my documentation efforts, without revealing her specific sources or the extent of information that had circulated through professional networks. The sophistication of her inquiry indicated that serious legal and corporate governance professionals were already analyzing the implications of Richard's actions for both Meridian Financial Solutions and the broader financial services industry. I specialize in representing executives and their families in situations involving corporate misconduct, regulatory investigations, and complex asset protection strategies. Margaret continued. "Your background in operations management and your current circumstances suggest that you would benefit from counsel that understands both the corporate governance implications and the personal protection strategies that apply to your situation." Quote, "The conversation revealed that my situation was more complex and potentially more advantageous than I had initially realized." Margaret explained that executives who violated fiduciary responsibilities and regulatory requirements often created opportunities for their spouses to claim damages not only through divorce proceedings, but also through separate civil actions based on the financial harm caused by professional misconduct. The documentation you've compiled regarding corporate resource misuse and confidentiality violations represents evidence of misconduct that could support multiple legal actions, Margaret explained with obvious professional interest. The regulatory investigations that this evidence could trigger would create substantial leverage for both divorce negotiations and potential civil recovery actions. Her analysis suggested that Richard's misconduct had created legal opportunities that extended far beyond simple marital asset division. The Securities and Exchange Commission imposed severe financial penalties for corporate governance violations, and these penalties often included disgorgement of ill-gotten gains and compensation for parties who had been financially harmed by executive misconduct. Furthermore, Margaret revealed that Meridian Financial Solutions would face significant regulatory and civil liability for Richard's actions, creating powerful incentives for the company to cooperate with investigations and potentially to provide compensation to parties who had been damaged by his violations of corporate policy and fiduciary responsibility. Corporate boards take these matters extremely seriously because regulatory sanctions can affect the company's ability to operate in regulated markets, Margaret explained. Meridian's board would have strong incentives to resolve this matter quickly and comprehensively to minimize regulatory exposure and reputational damage. The legal landscape that Margaret described was far more favorable to my interests than I had anticipated when I first began documenting Richard's misconduct. The evidence I had compiled could support not only advantageous divorce terms, but also separate legal actions that could provide substantial financial recovery beyond normal marital asset division. However, Margaret also emphasized that these opportunities required sophisticated legal strategy and expert representation by attorneys who specialized in the intersection of corporate governance, regulatory compliance, and family law. The stakes involved were substantial enough to justify significant legal investment, but they also required careful coordination to maximize recovery while minimizing risk of legal complications or regulatory backlash. I would recommend that we schedule a comprehensive consultation to review your documentation and develop a strategic approach that addresses both your immediate divorce considerations and the broader legal opportunities that Richard's misconduct has created, Margaret concluded. The timing of these actions could significantly affect both their effectiveness and your ultimate financial recovery. The second unexpected contact came from Dr. Patricia Hernandez, Executive Director of the Professional Women's Leadership Institute, an organization that I had heard about but never seriously considered joining during my years of focusing on supporting Richard's career rather than advancing my own professional development and networking activities. Patricia had learned about my situation through Margaret Chen, revealing that professional women in executive positions maintained informal networks that provided mutual support during career transitions and personal crises. These networks operated parallel to formal business relationships, offering resources and guidance that were not available through conventional corporate channels. Victoria, Margaret Chen suggested that I reach out to you regarding your current situation and potential career transition opportunities. Patricia began with the warm professionalism that characterized successful women who had navigated similar challenges in their own careers. The Professional Women's Leadership Institute provides strategic guidance and networking support for executive women who are facing major life transitions or career advancement opportunities. Her organization represented a resource that I had not known existed during my years of supporting Richard's professional advancement, while minimizing my own career development and professional visibility. The Institute provided services including executive coaching, strategic career planning, networking facilitation, and financial planning assistance specifically designed for professional women navigating major life transitions. Your background in operations management and your recent demonstration of strategic analysis capabilities suggest that you have significant untapped potential for executive leadership roles, Patricia continued, with obvious enthusiasm. Many of our members have achieved substantial career advancement during periods of personal crisis that forced them to recognize and develop capabilities they had been underutilizing. The conversation revealed opportunities for professional development and advancement that I had not considered while I remained focused on the immediate legal and financial challenges of my divorce proceedings. Patricia described case studies of women who had leveraged similar crises to achieve career breakthroughs that would not have been possible within their previous circumstances. Crisis often catalyzes recognition of capabilities and ambitions that have been suppressed by conventional role expectations, Patricia explained with the insight that comes from extensive experience helping women navigate major life transitions. Your analytical skills and strategic thinking abilities are precisely the qualifications that companies seek for senior executive positions, but these capabilities may not have been fully recognized or utilized in your current role. The Institute maintained relationships with executive search firms and corporate board members, who actively sought qualified women for senior leadership positions in operations management, strategic planning, and corporate governance. Patricia suggested that my background and recent demonstration of strategic capabilities would make me an attractive candidate for executive positions with substantially higher compensation and greater professional autonomy. We typically see compensation increases of 30 to 50% when our members transition from supporting roles to executive leadership positions, Patricia noted with satisfaction. The key is recognizing that the skills required for effective executive leadership are often the same capabilities that enable successful navigation of complex personal and legal challenges. The third contact in this emerging network came from Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a forensic accountant who specialized in asset recovery and financial investigation services for complex divorce proceedings. Jennifer had been recommended by Margaret Chen as someone who could provide expert analysis of the financial documentation I had compiled, while also identifying additional asset recovery opportunities that might not be apparent to non-specialists. Margaret Chen described your documentation efforts as exceptionally thorough and strategically focused, Jennifer began with professional admiration. Forensic accounting services are usually required to develop this type of comprehensive financial analysis, and your independent work demonstrates analytical capabilities that are quite remarkable for someone without specialized training in investigative accounting. Jennifer's analysis of my documentation revealed that I had identified the primary patterns of financial misconduct, but that additional investigation could potentially uncover larger asset transfers and more extensive regulatory violations than my initial analysis had detected. Her services could provide expert testimony for legal proceedings while also developing additional evidence that could support larger financial recovery actions. Corporate executives who engage in systematic misconduct typically exhibit patterns of behavior that extend beyond the initial violations that are discovered, Jennifer explained with the authority that comes from extensive experience investigating executive financial crimes. Your evidence suggests that Richard's misconduct was systematic and ongoing, which typically indicates additional violations that could be uncovered through comprehensive forensic analysis. The network of professional resources that was emerging around my situation represented capabilities and opportunities that I had not known existed during my years of conventional married life. These women had built careers and expertise specifically focused on helping other women navigate the intersection of personal crisis and professional opportunity. More importantly, their collective message emphasized that my situation represented an opportunity for transformation and advancement, rather than simply a crisis to be survived. The analytical capabilities and strategic thinking that I had demonstrated in documenting Richard's misconduct were precisely the qualifications that would enable success in more demanding and rewarding professional roles. The hidden network that was revealing itself consisted of women who had faced similar challenges and had developed both the expertise and the commitment to help others achieve similar transformations. Their support was practical and strategic rather than merely emotional, providing concrete resources and actionable guidance for navigating complex legal and professional challenges. Margaret Chen's legal expertise would ensure that I maximized the financial and legal advantages created by Richard's misconduct. Patricia Hernandez's career development resources would enable me to leverage this crisis into substantial professional advancement. Jennifer Walsh's forensic accounting services would ensure that I recovered the maximum possible financial compensation for the damages caused by Richard's betrayal and misconduct. Together, these professionals represented a comprehensive support system that could transform my marital crisis into a catalyst for achieving greater professional success and personal autonomy than I had ever considered possible during my years of supporting Richard's ambitions, while minimizing my own potential for leadership and achievement. The woman who had entered that anniversary dinner as a supportive corporate spouse was discovering that she belonged to a broader community of accomplished women who understood both the challenges and the opportunities that arise when conventional role expectations are disrupted by crisis and the necessity for independent strategic action. This hidden network was revealing that my situation was not unique, that my capabilities were more valuable than I had realized, and that the crisis Richard had created through his betrayal could become the foundation for building a more successful and fulfilling life than the subordinate partnership that our marriage had actually represented. The following Monday morning marked the beginning of an intensive education process that would fundamentally transform my understanding of legal strategy, financial analysis, and professional development in ways that extended far beyond the immediate requirements of my divorce proceedings. Margaret Chen had scheduled our comprehensive legal consultation for 9 o'clock, followed by a strategic planning session with Patricia Hernandez at the Professional Women's Leadership Institute, and a detailed financial analysis meeting with Jennifer Walsh later that afternoon. The systematic approach to acquiring specialized knowledge represented a fundamental shift from my previous method of addressing challenges through individual analysis and self-directed research. The network of professional advisors that had emerged around my situation provided access to expertise and strategic perspectives that would have taken years to develop independently, if such development had been possible at all given the specialized nature of the required knowledge. Margaret Chen's law offices occupied an entire floor of a prestigious Manhattan building that housed several prominent firms specializing in corporate governance and executive litigation. The sophisticated environment immediately conveyed the serious nature of the legal challenges and opportunities that my situation presented, while also demonstrating the level of professional resources that would be required to achieve optimal outcomes. The initial consultation began with Margaret's comprehensive review of the documentation that I had compiled regarding Richard's misconduct. Her analysis was both more detailed and more strategically focused than I had anticipated, revealing aspects of the evidence that I had not fully understood when I originally assembled the materials during my investigation of Richard's affair and financial irregularities. Your documentation demonstrates systematic corporate governance violations that create multiple opportunities for legal action, Margaret explained while organizing the materials into categories that reflected different types of potential claims and regulatory violations. The Securities and Exchange Commission takes fiduciary breaches extremely seriously, particularly when they involve misuse of corporate resources and unauthorized disclosure of confidential client information. Her analysis revealed that Richard's misconduct could support not only standard divorce proceedings but also separate civil actions based on breach of fiduciary duty, conversion of marital assets, and violations of securities regulations that had created financial damages extending beyond simple marital asset division. These additional legal theories could provide financial recovery that supplemented rather than replaced traditional divorce settlements. The corporate governance violations create leverage for divorce negotiations because Richard will face powerful incentives to settle favorably rather than risk public exposure and regulatory investigation, Margaret continued with obvious professional satisfaction. However, these same violations also support independent civil actions that could provide substantial financial recovery regardless of divorce settlement terms. The legal education that Margaret provided during our consultation extended far beyond the specific circumstances of my case to include broader principles of corporate governance law, securities regulation, and executive accountability that would prove valuable for understanding business relationships and professional obligations throughout my career. Her explanation of fiduciary duty concepts clarified the legal framework that governed executive behavior and corporate resource management, providing insights that would enhance my effectiveness in operations management roles and executive advisory services. The understanding of securities regulation principles would prove invaluable for consulting assignments involving corporate compliance and governance advisory services. The strategic planning session with Patricia Hernandez at the Professional Women's Leadership Institute provided equally valuable education regarding career development, executive leadership, and professional advancement strategies that I had never systematically studied, despite years of corporate experience and management responsibility. Patricia's assessment of my professional qualifications and advancement potential was both more optimistic and more strategic than my own evaluation of my career prospects and marketable capabilities. Her analysis revealed that operations management expertise combined with demonstrated strategic analysis abilities represented qualifications that were highly valued in executive search markets, particularly for positions requiring crisis management and organizational transformation capabilities. Your recent demonstration of investigative analysis and strategic documentation skills indicates executive leadership potential that may not have been fully recognized or utilized in your current role, Patricia explained with enthusiasm that reflected her extensive experience helping professional women recognize and develop underutilized capabilities. Companies actively seek executives who can combine operational expertise with strategic thinking and crisis management abilities. The career development education that Patricia provided included systematic analysis of executive competencies, strategic positioning techniques, and professional networking approaches that would enable effective pursuit of senior leadership positions with substantially higher compensation and greater professional autonomy than my current role provided. Her curriculum covered executive presence development, strategic communication skills, and leadership positioning techniques that were specifically designed for women transitioning from supporting roles to independent executive authority. These capabilities would prove essential for pursuing consulting opportunities and executive positions that leveraged my analytical abilities and strategic thinking skills. The Professional Women's Leadership Institute maintained comprehensive databases of executive search firms, corporate board positions, and consulting opportunities that were specifically focused on advancing qualified women into senior leadership roles. Patricia's network provided access to decision-makers and influence networks that would have been difficult to penetrate through conventional job search approaches. Executive advancement typically requires both demonstrated competence and strategic visibility within professional networks that monitor leadership talent, Patricia explained, while outlining networking strategies and professional development activities that would enhance my visibility and credibility within executive search communities. Your current crisis provides an opportunity to demonstrate capabilities that may not have been apparent during conventional corporate career progression. The afternoon session with Jennifer Walsh provided intensive education in forensic accounting principles, asset investigation techniques, and financial analysis methodologies that revealed the sophisticated expertise required for comprehensive asset recovery and financial investigation services. Jennifer's review of my initial financial documentation was both complimentary and instructive, highlighting analytical approaches that I had employed effectively, while also identifying additional investigation opportunities that could uncover larger patterns of financial misconduct and asset concealment. Your systematic approach to documenting financial irregularities demonstrates analytical capabilities that are typically developed through specialized training in forensic accounting and financial investigation, Jennifer observed with professional admiration. The comprehensive nature of your documentation suggests that you possess natural investigative instincts that could be developed into marketable consulting expertise. Her analysis revealed that Richard's financial misconduct was likely more extensive than my initial investigation had detected, suggesting that comprehensive forensic analysis could uncover additional asset transfers and regulatory violations that would support larger financial recovery actions and more favorable divorce settlement terms. The forensic accounting education that Jennifer provided included instruction in asset tracing techniques, financial pattern analysis, and investigative documentation standards that would prove valuable for consulting assignments involving corporate financial analysis and fraud detection services. Forensic accounting expertise is increasingly valuable in corporate governance consulting because companies need independent analysis of financial controls and executive accountability systems, Jennifer explained while demonstrating advanced analytical techniques and investigative methodologies. Your demonstrated analytical abilities could be developed into specialized consulting services that command premium fees and provide substantial professional autonomy. The comprehensive education process that occurred during this intensive day of professional consultations revealed that my situation provided opportunities for capability development and career advancement that extended far beyond the immediate requirements of divorce proceedings and financial asset protection. The legal expertise that Margaret Chen was providing would ensure optimal financial recovery while also developing my understanding of corporate governance principles that would enhance my value as an executive advisor and strategic consultant. The career development guidance from Patricia Hernandez would enable systematic pursuit of executive opportunities that leveraged my crisis management experience and strategic analysis capabilities. The forensic accounting instruction from Jennifer Walsh would provide specialized skills that could support independent consulting practice, while also enhancing my effectiveness in corporate operations management and financial oversight responsibilities. Together, these educational resources represented a comprehensive professional development program that would have been impossible to access during conventional career progression within corporate employment structures. The crisis that Richard had created through his affair and misconduct was inadvertently providing access to specialized expertise and advanced training that could accelerate my career development by years compared to traditional advancement pathways. The learning process also revealed that my analytical approach to investigating Richard's misconduct had demonstrated executive leadership capabilities that I had been underutilizing throughout my corporate career. The systematic documentation, strategic analysis, and comprehensive planning that I had employed were precisely the skills that companies sought for senior executive positions and high-level consulting assignments. More importantly, the education process was developing my confidence in pursuing professional opportunities that I had previously considered beyond my qualifications or experience level. The validation and strategic guidance provided by respected professionals was encouraging me to consider career objectives that would have seemed unrealistic during my years of supporting Richard's ambitions while minimizing my own professional potential. The woman who had begun this intensive learning day as someone facing personal crisis and financial uncertainty was ending it as someone who possessed marketable expertise, strategic advantages, and professional opportunities that could provide greater success and autonomy than she had achieved during years of conventional married life and corporate employment. The comprehensive education that I was receiving from acknowledged experts in their respective fields was demonstrating that crisis could become opportunity when approached with systematic learning, strategic planning, and willingness to develop capabilities that had been suppressed by conventional role expectations and limited professional ambitions. The foundation for transformation had been established through this intensive education process, providing both the knowledge and the confidence necessary to pursue professional and personal objectives that would ultimately prove more rewarding than the subordinate partnership that my marriage had actually represented. The breakthrough came 3 weeks after my intensive education sessions, arriving in the form of a phone call from Thomas Whitfield, Senior Managing Director at Meridian Financial Solutions and Chairman of the company's Audit Committee. His request for an immediate meeting demonstrated that the strategic approach I had developed with my professional advisors was beginning to generate the precise leverage that Margaret Chen had predicted would emerge from Richard's documented misconduct. Thomas had apparently been conducting his own investigation into Richard's activities, following anonymous reports that had reached the audit committee regarding potential corporate governance violations and misuse of company resources. The timing of his inquiry suggested that information about Richard's misconduct had begun circulating through corporate channels, independent of my documentation efforts, creating additional pressure that would ultimately work to my advantage in both divorce negotiations and potential civil recovery actions. Mrs. Sterling, I hope you will forgive the unusual nature of this contact, Thomas began with the careful formality that characterized senior executives who were navigating potentially explosive corporate governance issues. The audit committee has become aware of certain irregularities that may involve your husband's corporate expense management and client information handling procedures. We would appreciate the opportunity to discuss these matters with you in a confidential setting. His approach was both diplomatic and strategically focused, indicating that Meridian's board had recognized the serious legal and regulatory implications of Richard's actions, while also acknowledging that I possessed information that could be crucial for their internal investigation and damage control efforts. The corporate governance crisis that Richard had created through his personal misconduct was apparently forcing the company to choose between protecting him and protecting their own regulatory standing and fiduciary obligations to shareholders. The meeting was scheduled for the following morning at Whitfield's office, providing me with an opportunity to present my documentation to corporate leadership while also gathering additional information about the scope of Richard's misconduct and the company's planned response to regulatory and legal challenges that would inevitably follow public disclosure of his violations. Margaret Chen accompanied me to the meeting, providing both legal representation and strategic guidance for navigating the complex intersection of corporate governance issues and my personal legal interests. Her presence demonstrated the serious nature of the situation while also ensuring that any information I provided would be protected by attorney-client privilege and properly documented for potential legal proceedings. Thomas Whitfield's office occupied a corner of Meridian's executive floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows providing panoramic views of Manhattan's financial district that symbolized the company's position within the investment management industry. The sophisticated surroundings reflected the substantial assets under management and the high-stakes nature of the decisions that would determine both the company's regulatory compliance and my ultimate financial recovery from Richard's misconduct. The meeting began with Thomas's careful explanation of the audit committee's preliminary findings regarding Richard's expense account management and information security procedures. His presentation was thorough and professionally focused, revealing that the company's internal investigation had identified patterns of misconduct that closely aligned with the documentation I had compiled during my investigation of Richard's affair and financial irregularities. Our preliminary analysis has identified approximately $63,000 in corporate expenses that appear to lack proper business justification or documentation, Thomas explained while reviewing detailed financial records that paralleled my own investigation findings. These irregularities span 18 months and involve restaurant charges, hotel accommodations, jewelry purchases, and travel expenses that cannot be reconciled with legitimate business activities. The corporate investigation had also uncovered evidence that Richard had provided unauthorized access to confidential client information, creating potential Securities and Exchange Commission violations that could result in regulatory sanctions against both Richard personally and Meridian Financial Solutions as an institutional entity. The information security breaches are particularly concerning because they involve client portfolio data and strategic planning documents that should never have been accessible to unauthorized personnel, Thomas continued with obvious concern about the regulatory implications. The Securities and Exchange Commission imposes severe penalties for confidentiality violations, and these breaches could trigger comprehensive regulatory audits that would be extremely costly and potentially damaging to our business operations. However, Thomas also revealed that Meridian's board was prepared to take decisive action to minimize regulatory exposure and demonstrate corporate commitment to compliance and governance standards. The company's response would include immediate termination of Richard's employment, full cooperation with regulatory investigations, and comprehensive remediation measures designed to prevent similar violations in the future. The board has authorized me to discuss potential resolution mechanisms that could address both the company's regulatory concerns and any personal damages that may have resulted from these governance failures, Thomas explained, with the measured tone that characterized negotiations involving substantial financial stakes and complex legal considerations. The resolution framework that Thomas outlined included several components that would provide immediate financial benefits, while also supporting my longer-term legal strategy for maximum asset recovery and divorce settlement advantages. Meridian was prepared to provide substantial financial compensation for the damages caused by Richard's misconduct, including both direct financial losses and the personal disruption that had resulted from his violations of corporate policy and fiduciary responsibility. The company's offer included immediate payment of $150,000 as compensation for personal damages, plus additional payments that would be structured to minimize tax implications while maximizing my net financial recovery. These payments would be separate from any divorce settlement negotiations and would not affect my rights to pursue additional civil actions or regulatory complaints related to Richard's misconduct. Furthermore, Meridian was prepared to provide comprehensive documentation of Richard's violations that would support both divorce proceedings and any subsequent legal actions, including detailed financial records, internal investigation reports, and expert testimony regarding the scope and implications of his corporate governance failures. The board recognizes that corporate governance failures create obligations to all affected parties, including family members who have been damaged by executive misconduct, Thomas explained while outlining the company's comprehensive approach to remediation and accountability. Our goal is to ensure that these violations are addressed comprehensively, while also preventing similar problems in the future. The breakthrough that this meeting represented extended far beyond the immediate financial benefits that Meridian's offer provided. The corporate validation of my investigation findings demonstrated that my analytical approach and documentation methods had been professionally sound and strategically effective, confirming the value of the expertise that I had developed through this crisis management experience. More importantly, the meeting established my credibility as someone who possessed sophisticated understanding of corporate governance principles and regulatory compliance requirements. Thomas Whitfield's respectful treatment and the substantial nature of Meridian's offer reflected recognition that I was a serious professional who commanded respect rather than someone who could be dismissed or marginalized during complex business negotiations. The successful outcome also validated the strategic approach that my advisory team had developed for leveraging Richard's misconduct into financial and legal advantages. Margaret Chen's legal strategy had proven effective in creating corporate incentives for favorable resolution, while Patricia Hernandez's career development guidance had enhanced my confidence and professional presence during high-stakes negotiations. The comprehensive education that I had received in legal strategy, forensic accounting, and executive leadership had prepared me to participate effectively in sophisticated business discussions involving substantial financial stakes and complex regulatory considerations. The knowledge and skills that I had acquired during my intensive learning process had proven immediately applicable to achieving concrete results that exceeded my initial expectations. The financial agreement with Meridian also provided resources that would enable aggressive pursuit of additional opportunities while reducing the financial pressure that might otherwise have constrained my strategic options during divorce proceedings. The immediate cash settlement provided security and flexibility that would support optimal decision-making rather than decisions driven by financial desperation or limited resources. However, the most significant aspect of this breakthrough was its demonstration that the analytical capabilities and strategic thinking skills that I had developed during this crisis represented marketable expertise that extended far beyond my immediate personal circumstances. The successful resolution with Meridian had been achieved through the same systematic analysis, comprehensive documentation, and strategic negotiation that would be required for high-level consulting assignments and executive leadership positions. The woman who had entered that anniversary dinner as a supportive corporate spouse had successfully negotiated a six-figure settlement with a major financial services company, while also establishing her credibility as someone who possessed sophisticated understanding of corporate governance and regulatory compliance issues. The transformation from dependent spouse to strategic negotiator had been validated through measurable results that demonstrated both competence and effectiveness. The breakthrough represented proof that crisis could indeed become opportunity when approached with systematic learning, strategic planning, and professional guidance from acknowledged experts. The devastation that Richard had created through his affair and misconduct was generating financial and professional advantages that would ultimately provide greater security and autonomy than the subordinate partnership that our marriage had actually represented. The success also established a foundation for pursuing additional opportunities that would leverage the expertise and credibility that I had developed through this experience. The corporate governance knowledge, regulatory compliance understanding, and crisis management capabilities that had enabled success with Meridian would prove valuable for consulting assignments and executive positions that required similar analytical and strategic competencies. Most importantly, the breakthrough had demonstrated that my initial assessment of the situation as an opportunity for transformation, rather than simply a crisis to be survived, had been correct. The systematic approach to capability development and strategic action had generated results that validated both the potential for professional advancement and the effectiveness of the methodologies that would enable continued success in increasingly demanding and rewarding assignments. The successful resolution with Meridian Financial Solutions had apparently triggered a coordinated response from Richard and his professional associates that revealed the extent to which my strategic approach threatened established power structures and financial arrangements that extended far beyond our personal marriage. The resistance that emerged during the following weeks was both more sophisticated and more aggressive than I had anticipated, suggesting that Richard possessed resources and alliances that he had not previously deployed in our marital conflicts. The first indication of organized opposition came through my corporate email at Hartwell Industries, where I received a formal communication from the company's legal department requesting an immediate meeting to discuss potential conflicts of interest and confidentiality concerns related to my involvement in regulatory investigations affecting other companies within our industry sector. The timing and formal nature of this inquiry suggested that Richard had initiated efforts to undermine my professional standing through corporate channels that could affect my employment security and career advancement opportunities. David Morrison, general counsel at Hartwell Industries, had scheduled the meeting for the following morning with minimal advance notice and limited explanation of the specific concerns that had prompted this unusual inquiry. His approach was formal and somewhat intimidating, designed to create anxiety and uncertainty about my professional standing while also gathering information about my activities and legal strategy that could potentially be shared with Richard through professional networks and industry relationships. Victoria, we have received inquiries from several industry contacts regarding your involvement in regulatory matters affecting Meridian Financial Solutions. David began with the measured tone that characterized legal discussions involving potentially serious professional implications. The company needs to ensure that your activities do not create conflicts of interest or confidentiality violations that could affect Hartwell's business relationships or regulatory standing. His questions were carefully crafted to gather intelligence about my legal strategy and professional advisors while also creating implied threats about employment consequences if my activities were deemed incompatible with company interests. The inquiry represented a sophisticated attempt to pressure me into limiting my pursuit of legal remedies, while also isolating me from professional support networks that had proven crucial for achieving success with Meridian. The corporate pressure campaign that David Morrison's inquiry represented was clearly coordinated with Richard's broader strategy for minimizing the financial and legal consequences of his misconduct. Richard apparently possessed sufficient influence within our shared professional community to initiate employment pressures that could force me to choose between pursuing legal remedies and maintaining career security. However, the corporate governance education that I had received from Margaret Chen and my advisory team had prepared me to recognize and respond effectively to these pressure tactics. The attempt to create employment consequences for pursuing legitimate legal remedies actually constituted potential retaliation that could support additional legal claims, while also demonstrating the seriousness of the threats that Richard perceived from my strategic approach. David, my involvement in regulatory matters is based on documented evidence of corporate governance violations that I discovered through legitimate investigation of financial irregularities affecting my personal interests. I responded with the confident professionalism that my recent education and successful negotiations had developed. These activities are protected by whistleblower statutes and represent compliance with legal obligations rather than conflicts of interest. My response was designed to establish that I understood both my legal rights and the potential consequences of corporate retaliation, while also demonstrating that I possessed sophisticated legal counsel and would not be intimidated by employment pressures or professional isolation tactics. The meeting with David Morrison also revealed that the professional community's response to my situation was more complex than simple support or opposition. Several industry contacts had apparently expressed concerns about the precedent that my successful challenge to executive misconduct might establish for other situations involving corporate governance violations and spouse accountability for executive actions. The resistance that was emerging reflected broader anxieties within corporate executive communities about increased scrutiny of personal conduct and family relationship dynamics that had traditionally been considered private matters beyond the scope of professional accountability. My successful documentation of Richard's misconduct and recovery of substantial financial damages had apparently created concerns that similar approaches might be employed by other spouses who discovered comparable violations. The second front of resistance emerged through attempted interference with my professional advisory relationships, as Richard apparently initiated efforts to undermine my access to the legal and strategic counsel that had proven essential for achieving favorable outcomes in my negotiations with Meridian Financial Solutions. Margaret Chen received inquiries from professional colleagues suggesting that her representation of me created potential conflicts of interest with other corporate clients who might be affected by regulatory investigations or legal precedents that our case could establish. These inquiries represented subtle pressure designed to encourage her withdrawal from my case while also limiting my access to specialized legal expertise that was crucial for pursuing additional recovery actions. Patricia Hernandez encountered similar pressure through professional networks associated with the Professional Women's Leadership Institute, with suggestions that her organization's support for my career development activities could be misinterpreted as endorsement of aggressive legal tactics that might damage relationships between professional women's organizations and corporate executive communities. Jennifer Walsh faced inquiries about her forensic accounting work that implied potential professional liability risks associated with her analysis of corporate financial records and executive misconduct patterns. These contacts were clearly designed to create uncertainty about continued professional support, while also gathering intelligence about the scope and direction of our investigation and legal strategy. The coordinated nature of these pressure campaigns revealed that Richard possessed access to professional networks and influence capabilities that exceeded what I had previously understood about his position within the financial services industry. The systematic approach to undermining my professional relationships suggested sophisticated strategic planning that indicated significant resources and organizational support for his resistance efforts. However, the pressure campaigns also revealed the extent to which my approach threatened established arrangements and power structures that extended far beyond our personal relationship. The aggressive response suggested that my successful challenge to Richard's misconduct had implications for corporate governance accountability and spouse rights that were causing anxiety throughout executive communities that preferred to maintain traditional boundaries between personal and professional conduct. The resistance that was emerging also included more direct attempts at intimidation and harassment designed to create personal stress and uncertainty that might undermine my resolve to pursue comprehensive legal remedies and financial recovery actions. Richard began employing private investigators to monitor my activities and gather information about my professional relationships and personal circumstances that could potentially be used for character assassination or legal harassment. The surveillance activities included monitoring of my residence, workplace observations, and investigation of my financial transactions and professional communications. These efforts were clearly designed to create anxiety and uncertainty, while also gathering intelligence that could be used to anticipate and counter my strategic initiatives. Richard also initiated a campaign of social isolation designed to undermine my personal support networks and professional relationships within our shared community circles. Several mutual friends received communications suggesting that my legal actions represented vindictive behavior that was motivated by personal spite rather than legitimate grievances about professional misconduct and financial violations. The social pressure campaign included suggestions that my pursuit of legal remedies was damaging to Richard's career prospects and professional reputation in ways that exceeded appropriate responses to marital discord and personal relationship failures. These communications were designed to create social pressure for me to accept more limited settlement terms, while also isolating me from community support that might encourage continued pursuit of comprehensive legal remedies. The sophistication and intensity of the resistance that was emerging confirmed that my strategic approach was generating precisely the leverage and financial pressure that Margaret Chen had predicted would result from systematic documentation of corporate governance violations and regulatory compliance failures. The aggressive response validated the effectiveness of our legal strategy, while also demonstrating the substantial financial stakes that motivated such comprehensive opposition efforts. However, the resistance campaigns also revealed vulnerabilities in Richard's position that could be exploited to achieve additional advantages in our ongoing legal negotiations. The desperate nature of his efforts to undermine my professional relationships and legal counsel suggested that he recognized the serious financial and legal consequences that would result from continued pursuit of regulatory investigations and civil recovery actions. The attempts to intimidate my professional advisors actually provided additional evidence of obstruction and retaliation that could support enhanced damage claims, while also demonstrating the pattern of misconduct that characterized Richard's approach to legal and professional obligations. The pressure campaigns were generating documentation that would prove valuable for establishing the scope of damages and the need for comprehensive financial remedies. Most importantly, the resistance that was emerging was strengthening my resolve to pursue maximum legal remedies, rather than accepting limited settlement terms that would allow Richard to escape appropriate consequences for his misconduct. The aggressive opposition demonstrated that substantial additional financial recovery was possible if I maintained strategic focus and continued working with my professional advisory team to develop comprehensive legal responses. The woman who had begun this journey as someone discovering her husband's affair was now facing organized opposition from established power structures that recognized her success as a threat to traditional arrangements that protected executive misconduct from family accountability. The resistance validated both the effectiveness of her approach and the importance of continuing to challenge systems that enabled such misconduct through lack of comprehensive accountability measures. The emergence of sophisticated opposition also demonstrated that her transformation from dependent spouse to strategic advocate had achieved sufficient success to warrant serious attention from professional communities that preferred to maintain existing power structures and accountability limitations. The resistance itself had become evidence of the significance and effectiveness of her strategic approach to achieving justice and financial recovery. The coordinated opposition that had emerged against my legal efforts required a comprehensive strategic response that would neutralize Richard's pressure campaigns, while simultaneously advancing my financial recovery objectives and professional development goals. The sophisticated nature of the resistance had actually provided valuable intelligence about the scope of resources that Richard could deploy, while also revealing vulnerabilities in his position that could be exploited through carefully planned countermeasures. Margaret Chen convened an emergency strategy session with my entire advisory team to address the multifaceted challenges that the opposition efforts had created. The meeting demonstrated the value of maintaining professional relationships with acknowledged experts who possessed both the expertise and the strategic perspective necessary to develop effective responses to sophisticated corporate and legal pressure campaigns. The strategic analysis that emerged from this comprehensive consultation revealed that Richard's aggressive tactics had actually created additional legal vulnerabilities that could support enhanced damage claims, while also providing evidence of obstruction and retaliation that would strengthen our existing case for substantial financial recovery. The attempts to interfere with your professional relationships and employment security constitute potential witness intimidation and obstruction that significantly enhance the damages we can pursue, Margaret explained while reviewing the documentation of corporate pressure campaigns and professional harassment that had emerged during the previous weeks. These actions demonstrate a pattern of misconduct that extends far beyond the original governance violations. The legal framework that Margaret outlined provided multiple opportunities to transform Richard's resistance efforts into strategic advantages that would ultimately support larger financial settlements, while also establishing legal precedents that would deter similar retaliation efforts in future cases involving corporate governance violations and spouse accountability. The strategic response that we developed included several coordinated components designed to neutralize the pressure campaigns while simultaneously advancing our legal objectives through documentation of Richard's continuing misconduct and escalating violation of professional and legal standards. The first element involved formal complaints to professional regulatory bodies regarding the corporate pressure campaigns that had been initiated against my employment and professional relationships. These complaints would create official records of retaliation while also triggering regulatory investigations that would impose additional scrutiny on Richard's professional conduct and business relationships. Margaret had identified specific regulatory frameworks that protected individuals who reported corporate governance violations from retaliation and professional harassment. The complaints that we would file would establish formal protection while also creating legal obligations for regulatory bodies to investigate the pressure campaigns and impose appropriate sanctions on parties who violated whistleblower protection statutes. The Securities and Exchange Commission and other regulatory bodies take retaliation against compliance reporting extremely seriously, Margaret noted while outlining the formal complaint process. These agencies have substantial enforcement capabilities that can impose severe penalties on individuals and organizations that engage in witness intimidation or professional harassment. The second component of our strategic response involved proactive communication with industry contacts and professional organizations to establish accurate narratives about my legal actions and professional qualifications. This initiative would counter the misinformation campaigns that Richard had apparently initiated, while also enhancing my professional reputation and credibility within business communities that could provide future career opportunities. Patricia Hernandez developed a comprehensive professional positioning strategy that would leverage my recent successes and acquired expertise to establish my reputation as someone who possessed valuable capabilities in corporate governance analysis, crisis management, and strategic problem solving. The communication approach would emphasize my professional qualifications and achievements, rather than focusing on the personal circumstances that had motivated my legal actions. The positioning strategy included targeted outreach to executive search firms, corporate board members, and industry publications that could provide platforms for demonstrating my expertise, while also building professional relationships that would support future career advancement and consulting opportunities. Your successful resolution with Meridian Financial Solutions represents exactly the type of crisis management and strategic analysis capability that companies seek for senior executive positions, Patricia explained, while developing communication materials that would establish my professional brand and market positioning. The opposition you are facing actually validates the significance and effectiveness of your strategic approach. The third element of our response strategy involved expanding the scope of our financial investigation to identify additional assets and misconduct patterns that could support larger damage claims, while also creating additional pressure for favorable settlement negotiations. Jennifer Walsh had identified several areas where Richard's financial activities suggested potential violations that had not been fully investigated during our initial analysis. The systematic nature of the opposition efforts suggests that Richard possesses financial resources and professional relationships that exceed what your original investigation revealed, Jennifer observed while outlining expanded forensic analysis opportunities. The sophisticated coordination of pressure campaigns typically indicates access to substantial funding and professional services that should be traceable through comprehensive financial investigation. The expanded investigation would include analysis of Richard's professional relationships, business investments, and financial arrangements with associates who might have participated in the coordination of opposition efforts. These relationships could reveal additional misconduct patterns while also identifying assets that could be subject to recovery actions. The strategic intelligence that Jennifer's expanded analysis would provide would also enhance our understanding of Richard's financial capabilities and strategic options, enabling more effective negotiation tactics and settlement positioning that reflected accurate assessment of his resources and vulnerabilities. The fourth component of our response strategy involved developing proactive legal actions that would shift the initiative from defensive responses to Richard's pressure campaigns toward aggressive pursuit of enhanced financial recovery through multiple legal theories that his recent misconduct had strengthened. Margaret had identified opportunities to file additional civil actions based on the obstruction and retaliation evidence that Richard's opposition efforts had generated. These actions would seek damages for professional interference, witness intimidation, and violations of legal protections that governed individuals who reported corporate governance violations to regulatory authorities. The enhanced legal strategy would also include pursuit of punitive damages that reflected the systematic nature of Richard's misconduct and his continuing violation of professional standards and legal obligations. The pattern of behavior that his resistance efforts had established would support substantially larger financial awards than the compensatory damages that our original claims had sought. The escalating pattern of misconduct provides strong foundation for seeking punitive damages that could substantially exceed the financial recovery that compensatory claims alone would provide, Margaret explained while developing the expanded legal strategy. Courts impose severe penalties when defendants engage in obstruction and retaliation that demonstrates continuing disregard for legal obligations. The comprehensive strategic response that emerged from these collaborative planning sessions represented a fundamental shift from reactive crisis management to proactive strategic advancement that would establish my position as someone who could not be intimidated or marginalized through conventional pressure tactics. The response strategy also demonstrated the value of maintaining professional relationships with experts who possessed both specialized knowledge and strategic perspective that enabled effective responses to sophisticated opposition efforts. The coordination between legal counsel, career development advisors, and forensic analysis services created capabilities that exceeded what any individual advisor could provide independently. More importantly, the strategic response that we developed would establish precedents and professional relationships that would support future career advancement and consulting opportunities that leverage the expertise and credibility that I had developed through this comprehensive crisis management experience. The opposition that Richard had organized was actually accelerating my professional development and market positioning by forcing me to work with acknowledged experts in developing sophisticated responses to complex legal and business challenges. The capabilities that I was acquiring through this process would prove valuable for executive positions and consulting assignments that required similar strategic thinking and crisis management expertise. The woman who had discovered her husband's affair through careful investigation was now developing and implementing strategic responses to coordinated corporate pressure campaigns, while working with teams of professional advisors to pursue enhanced financial recovery through multiple legal theories and regulatory frameworks. The transformation from dependent spouse to strategic professional was being validated through measurable results that demonstrated both competence and effectiveness in managing complex legal and business challenges. The opposition that Richard had organized was actually providing additional opportunities to demonstrate capabilities that would prove valuable throughout my future career. The strategic response that we implemented would neutralize the pressure campaigns, while simultaneously advancing financial recovery objectives and professional development goals that would ultimately provide greater security and autonomy than the subordinate partnership that our marriage had represented. Most significantly, the comprehensive approach to managing sophisticated opposition demonstrated that systematic preparation, professional guidance, and strategic coordination could overcome challenges that initially seemed overwhelming or insurmountable. The resistance that had emerged was becoming evidence of the effectiveness of our approach, while also providing additional opportunities for achieving enhanced outcomes through persistent and intelligent strategic action. The foundation that had been established through systematic education and professional relationship development was now supporting successful navigation of complex opposition efforts while advancing toward outcomes that would validate the transformation from crisis victim to strategic professional advocate. The culminating confrontation arrived 6 weeks after the implementation of our comprehensive strategic response, delivered through a formal mediation process that would determine whether my systematic approach to documentation, legal strategy, and professional development had generated sufficient leverage to achieve optimal financial recovery, while establishing definitive resolution of all claims related to Richard's misconduct and our marital dissolution. The mediation venue was the prestigious law offices of Harrison, Caldwell and Associates, a neutral firm that specialized in complex commercial disputes and high-stakes family law matters involving substantial assets and sophisticated legal issues. The selection of this particular firm reflected the serious nature of the stakes involved and the need for mediation services that could handle the intersection of corporate governance violations, regulatory compliance issues, and marital asset division that characterized our comprehensive legal dispute. Margaret Chen had prepared extensively for this decisive negotiation session, developing detailed position papers that outlined our legal theories, damage calculations, and settlement parameters, while also anticipating the arguments and counteroffers that Richard's legal team would likely present during the mediation process. Her preparation demonstrated the value of systematic legal strategy and thorough case development for achieving favorable outcomes in high-stakes negotiations. The comprehensive preparation also included coordination with Patricia Hernandez and Jennifer Walsh to ensure that our negotiation approach reflected not only immediate financial recovery objectives, but also longer-term professional development goals that would maximize my career advancement opportunities and establish optimal positioning for future consulting and executive opportunities. Richard arrived at the mediation accompanied by a team of 3 attorneys representing different aspects of his legal exposure, including corporate governance violations, regulatory compliance issues, and divorce settlement negotiations. The substantial legal representation that he had assembled indicated both the seriousness of his legal vulnerabilities and the significant financial resources that he was prepared to invest in limiting his liability and settlement obligations. His lead counsel was Harrison Blackwell, a prominent partner at Sterling Morrison and Associates, who specialized in executive defense and corporate crisis management. Blackwell's reputation for aggressive tactics and sophisticated legal strategy suggested that Richard was prepared to contest our claims vigorously, while attempting to minimize both financial liability and public exposure of his professional misconduct. The mediation process began with comprehensive presentations from both legal teams, outlining their respective positions, supporting evidence, and settlement objectives. These presentations would establish the factual and legal framework for subsequent negotiation discussions, while also providing opportunities for each side to assess the strength of opposing arguments and the likelihood of achieving favorable outcomes through continued litigation versus negotiated settlement. Margaret Chen's presentation was methodical and compelling, demonstrating the systematic documentation of Richard's corporate governance violations, the substantial financial damages that his misconduct had caused, and the strong legal theories that supported our claims for comprehensive financial recovery through multiple legal frameworks including divorce settlement, civil damages, and regulatory penalties. Her presentation included detailed financial analysis showing that Richard's misuse of corporate resources exceeded $130,000, while his confidentiality violations had created potential regulatory liability that could result in millions of dollars in fines and sanctions against both Richard personally and any companies that employed him in securities-related positions. The evidence presentation also demonstrated the systematic nature of Richard's financial deception, including the transfer of marital assets to hidden accounts and the coordination of his affair with Cassandra Mitchell using corporate resources and confidential information that violated multiple legal and professional obligations. Harrison Blackwell's response presentation attempted to minimize the significance of Richard's actions, while arguing that our financial demands exceeded reasonable compensation for the actual damages that could be proven through legal proceedings. His strategy emphasized characterizing Richard's misconduct as isolated errors in judgment rather than systematic violations that warranted substantial financial penalties and comprehensive remediation. However, Blackwell's arguments were undermined by the comprehensive nature of our documentation and the continuing pattern of misconduct that Richard's opposition efforts had established. The attempts to interfere with my professional relationships and employment security had created additional evidence of obstruction and retaliation that strengthened our position while demonstrating Richard's continuing disregard for legal obligations and professional standards. The mediation discussion that followed these initial presentations revealed the extent to which our strategic approach had generated decisive advantages in the negotiation process. The combination of systematic documentation, regulatory leverage, and professional retaliation evidence had created multiple pressure points that made continued litigation extremely risky for Richard, while providing us with strong incentives to pursue maximum financial recovery through all available legal theories. The mediator, Judge Patricia Reynolds, was a retired federal judge with extensive experience in complex commercial litigation and regulatory enforcement proceedings. Her analysis of the evidence and legal theories presented by both sides clearly indicated that our position was substantially stronger than Richard's defense strategy, particularly given the continuing pattern of misconduct that his opposition efforts had documented. The evidence of systematic corporate governance violations is quite compelling, Judge Reynolds observed during the preliminary assessment phase of the mediation. The documentation demonstrates not only the initial misconduct, but also a pattern of obstruction and retaliation that significantly enhances the potential damages and regulatory exposure. Her assessment validated the strategic approach that we had developed, while also indicating that our financial demands were reasonable, given the scope of misconduct and the strength of our legal position. The mediator's preliminary evaluation provided strong encouragement to pursue maximum settlement terms, while also creating pressure on Richard's team to make substantial concessions rather than risk continued litigation with unfavorable prospects. The negotiation process that ensued during the following 8 hours demonstrated the value of systematic preparation and strategic coordination between legal counsel, financial analysis, and professional positioning that we had maintained throughout the entire process. Each component of our comprehensive approach contributed to achieving optimal outcomes during this decisive confrontation. Richard's initial settlement offer was substantially below our minimum acceptable terms, reflecting either unrealistic assessment of his legal vulnerabilities or strategic positioning designed to test our resolve and willingness to pursue continued litigation. The inadequate offer provided opportunities to demonstrate the strength of our evidence while also establishing that we were prepared to reject insufficient proposals in favor of pursuing enhanced recovery through formal legal proceedings. The detailed response that Margaret Chen provided to Richard's insufficient offer included systematic analysis of the regulatory exposure that continued litigation would create, the enhanced damages that obstruction evidence would support, and the professional consequences that public disclosure of his misconduct would generate for his future career prospects and financial stability. The evidence of corporate governance violations alone supports recovery that substantially exceeds your initial offer, Margaret explained, while presenting detailed damage calculations that included both compensatory and punitive elements. The additional evidence of obstruction and professional retaliation creates enhanced liability that makes your current proposal inadequate by any reasonable standard. The negotiation dynamics that emerged during subsequent rounds of offers and counteroffers demonstrated that our strategic approach had generated precisely the leverage that was necessary to achieve comprehensive financial recovery while also establishing terms that would provide optimal protection for my future financial security and professional development objectives. Richard's legal team gradually increased their settlement offers as the mediation process continued, but each proposal remained below the comprehensive resolution that our evidence and legal position warranted. The incremental concessions indicated that Richard was beginning to recognize the serious nature of his legal exposure while still attempting to minimize the financial consequences of his systematic misconduct. The breakthrough in negotiations occurred when Judge Reynolds provided her preliminary assessment of likely litigation outcomes based on the evidence and legal theories that both sides had presented. Her analysis indicated that continued litigation would likely result in substantially larger financial awards than the settlement terms that Richard had been offering, while also creating additional regulatory exposure and professional consequences that would be far more damaging than negotiated resolution. Based on the evidence presented, I believe that litigation would likely result in damage awards that substantially exceed the current settlement discussions, Judge Reynolds stated during her formal assessment. The systematic nature of the misconduct and the evidence of continuing violations create strong foundation for enhanced financial recovery through multiple legal theories. This authoritative assessment from an experienced federal judge created decisive pressure for Richard's team to make substantial concessions that reflected realistic evaluation of their legal vulnerabilities and the likely consequences of continued litigation versus negotiated settlement. The final settlement agreement that emerged from this intensive mediation process exceeded our initial financial objectives, while also providing comprehensive protection for my future career development and professional advancement opportunities. The terms included immediate payment of $450,000 as comprehensive resolution of all claims related to Richard's misconduct, plus ongoing financial obligations that would provide continued security during my transition to independent professional practice. The agreement also included provisions that prevented Richard from interfering with my professional relationships or career advancement activities, while establishing clear boundaries that would prevent future harassment or retaliation efforts. These protections would enable optimal focus on consulting opportunities and executive positions that leveraged the expertise and credibility that I had developed through this comprehensive crisis management experience. Most significantly, the successful resolution validated the systematic approach to crisis management, strategic planning, and professional development that had transformed personal devastation into professional opportunity and financial security that exceeded what our marriage had ever provided. The successful resolution of my mediation with Richard generated consequences that extended far beyond the substantial financial settlement and legal protections that we had achieved through our comprehensive strategic approach. Within 48 hours of finalizing the agreement, I began receiving inquiries from sources that demonstrated how news of my success had traveled through professional networks and corporate governance communities, in ways that created opportunities I had never anticipated when I first discovered Richard's misconduct and began documenting his violations. The first unexpected contact came from Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, Dean of the Executive Leadership Program at Columbia Business School, who had apparently learned about my case through academic colleagues who studied corporate governance and crisis management methodologies. Her inquiry revealed that my systematic approach to investigating and resolving executive misconduct had attracted attention from academic institutions that were seeking real-world case studies for their executive education curricula. Dr. Morrison explained that Columbia's Executive Leadership Program regularly invited professionals who had demonstrated exceptional crisis management and strategic thinking capabilities to serve as guest lecturers and case study participants for their advanced management courses. The comprehensive documentation and strategic resolution that characterized my situation represented exactly the type of sophisticated problem-solving that their program used to teach senior executives about governance accountability and strategic crisis response. Your methodical approach to investigating corporate governance violations and your successful coordination of multiple professional advisors to achieve comprehensive resolution represents precisely the type of strategic thinking that we seek to develop in senior executives, Dr. Morrison explained during our initial conversation. The case demonstrates how systematic analysis and professional collaboration can transform apparent disasters into opportunities for enhanced outcomes. The academic interest in my experience suggested that the capabilities I had developed through this crisis possessed broader applicability that extended beyond personal legal matters to include general principles of crisis management, strategic analysis, and professional coordination that would be valuable for executive education and consulting applications. Dr. Morrison's inquiry also revealed that my successful challenge to executive misconduct had established a precedent that was being studied by corporate governance researchers and legal scholars who were analyzing the evolving relationship between personal accountability and professional responsibility in executive positions. The intersection of family law and corporate governance that my case represented was apparently breaking new ground in regulatory enforcement and civil recovery methodologies. This second unexpected consequence emerged through contact from Harrison Technologies, a Fortune 500 manufacturing company that was facing a complex corporate governance crisis involving potential executive misconduct and regulatory compliance violations. Their general counsel, Michael Patterson, had learned about my successful resolution through professional networks and was seeking consulting services to help develop their internal investigation and remediation strategy. We have become aware of your recent success in documenting and resolving corporate governance violations through a comprehensive approach that achieved both legal accountability and financial recovery, Michael Patterson explained during his initial inquiry. Our company is facing similar challenges that require exactly the type of systematic analysis and strategic coordination that characterized your resolution. The consulting opportunity that Harrison Technologies was offering would provide immediate income while also leveraging the expertise and credibility that I had developed through my own crisis management experience. The compensation being discussed exceeded my annual salary at Hartwell Industries, while the assignment would enhance my professional reputation and establish my credentials for future consulting engagements in corporate governance and crisis management. The consulting engagement would also provide practical application of the knowledge and skills that I had acquired through my intensive education with Margaret Chen, Patricia Hernandez, and Jennifer Walsh. The systematic approach to investigation, documentation, and strategic resolution that had proven effective in my personal situation would be directly applicable to helping corporations address similar governance challenges while minimizing regulatory exposure and financial liability. Furthermore, the Harrison Technologies engagement would establish my professional brand as someone who possessed specialized expertise in corporate governance crisis management and strategic problem resolution. This positioning would create opportunities for additional consulting assignments and potentially for executive positions that required similar capabilities and strategic thinking skills. The third unexpected development involved recognition from the Securities and Exchange Commission, which had initiated its own investigation into Richard's misconduct based on the evidence that our regulatory complaints had provided. The SEC investigation had apparently identified additional violations and industry-wide patterns that suggested my case represented a significant precedent for regulatory enforcement and corporate accountability measures. Sarah Chen, senior enforcement attorney at the Securities and Exchange Commission, contacted me to discuss potential expert witness services for ongoing regulatory proceedings that were addressing similar corporate governance violations. Her inquiry revealed that the systematic documentation and comprehensive analysis that I had developed had become a model for regulatory enforcement actions involving executive misconduct and corporate compliance failures. Your documentation methodology and comprehensive approach to evidence gathering has established new standards for regulatory complaint preparation and corporate governance investigation, Sarah Chen explained during our confidential discussion. The SEC is interested in developing training programs and enforcement protocols based on the analytical framework that you employed in your successful resolution. The regulatory recognition suggested that my transformation from dependent spouse to strategic professional had generated impact that extended far beyond personal financial recovery, to include contributions to broader corporate accountability and regulatory enforcement improvements. The systematic approach that had served my individual interests was apparently providing value for regulatory agencies and corporate governance improvement initiatives. The expert witness services that the SEC was requesting would provide additional income while also establishing my credentials as someone who possessed specialized knowledge that was valued by federal regulatory agencies. This recognition would enhance my credibility for consulting engagements and executive positions, while also creating opportunities for ongoing professional relationships with regulatory professionals and corporate governance experts. The fourth consequence involved unexpected personal transformation that accompanied the professional recognition and financial success that my strategic approach had generated. The woman who had discovered her husband's affair while maintaining the role of supportive corporate spouse had evolved into someone who possessed confidence, professional credibility, and financial independence. It enabled pursuit of opportunities that would have been inconceivable during my years of subordinating my ambitions to support Richard's career advancement. The comprehensive education that I had received from my professional advisory team had provided not only specific knowledge for resolving my immediate crisis, but also broader understanding of legal principles, financial analysis methodologies, and strategic thinking frameworks that would prove valuable throughout my future career development and professional advancement. The successful coordination of multiple professional advisors had demonstrated my capability for managing complex projects that required integration of diverse expertise and strategic perspectives. These project management and professional coordination skills would prove essential for consulting engagements and executive positions that required similar collaborative capabilities and strategic leadership. The negotiation experience that had culminated in our successful mediation had provided practical education in high-stakes professional discussions involving substantial financial consequences and complex legal considerations. The confidence and competence that I had developed through this process would enable effective participation in similar business negotiations and strategic decision-making situations throughout my career. The financial independence that the settlement had provided created freedom to pursue professional opportunities based on their strategic value and personal interest rather than immediate income requirements. This independence would enable selective pursuit of consulting engagements and executive positions that offered optimal combinations of professional development, financial rewards, and personal satisfaction. However, the most significant unexpected consequence was the recognition that the crisis that had initially seemed devastating had actually created opportunities for personal and professional transformation that exceeded what I had achieved during years of conventional married life and corporate employment. The systematic approach to crisis management had revealed capabilities and interests that had been suppressed by traditional role expectations and limited professional ambitions. The network of professional relationships that had developed through my advisory team and subsequent consulting opportunities represented resources that would continue providing value throughout my career advancement and professional development. The credibility that I had established through successful crisis resolution would open doors to opportunities that would have been unavailable through conventional career progression within corporate employment structures. The expertise that I had acquired in corporate governance, regulatory compliance, and crisis management represented marketable capabilities that were increasingly valuable in business environments that required sophisticated understanding of accountability requirements and strategic risk management. The combination of analytical skills, strategic thinking abilities, and practical experience would prove essential for senior executive positions and high-level consulting assignments. Most importantly, the transformation had demonstrated that conventional limitations on personal and professional potential were often self-imposed restrictions based on inadequate understanding of available opportunities and insufficient confidence in personal capabilities. The systematic approach to capability development and strategic action had proven that apparent disasters could become catalysts for achieving outcomes that exceeded previous aspirations and expectations. The woman who had entered that anniversary dinner as someone who had spent 16 years supporting her husband's ambitions while minimizing her own potential had emerged as someone who possessed the knowledge, credibility, and confidence necessary to pursue professional opportunities that would provide greater financial security, personal satisfaction, and professional recognition than the subordinate partnership that our marriage had represented. The unexpected consequences of my strategic approach to crisis management had transformed personal devastation into professional opportunity, while establishing the foundation for continued advancement and achievement that would extend far beyond the immediate resolution of my marital and legal challenges. The crisis had become the catalyst for discovering and developing capabilities that would provide value throughout my future career and personal development. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.